One thing that rank-and-file Americans have been saying in response to this, as they debate for themselves the nature of the threat, is that the innocent have nothing to worry about. Yes, our movements may be tracked, our credit card purchases may be kept in a record, the patterns, unique patterns of our fingerprints or the shape of our eyes may be kept in some massive database, but if you're not in the business of doing anything wrong, you've got nothing to worry about. In this age of the ability to capture and retain vast amounts of information on every person in this country, why should anybody who's not a criminal be worried? It's not the world's most sophisticated legal argument, but it seems to come out of the school of common sense.
Well, it would if we were convinced beyond reasonable doubt that government and authorities are always effective, always efficient, always honest, always clear that the truth has got to be the determiner rather than what is politic or what is convenient or congenial for the moment. But there are lots and lots of situations where government, like all the rest of us, makes mistakes, gets it wrong, is absolutely convinced that this is the right thing to do, and therefore shades the evidence a little bit. In my field, in medicine and psychiatry, we sometimes say that doctors make a diagnosis in the first 20 seconds and spend the next 20 years trying to prove that they were right. And sometimes intelligence does that, and sometimes the police do it, and sometimes governments do it, because they're human beings like the rest of us. And that's why putting too much trust in government has rarely in the past been a failing of the American people. They've tended to be fairly careful and fairly skeptical and holding people to account. I think they've been wise to do that in the past because of human nature, rather than because government is particularly bad, and human nature hasn't changed that much.
Are either of you ready to argue that you can meet Lord Alderdice's threshold for this question?
Well, I think, this gets to the threshold issue. There's this presumption that the potential for abuse is somehow like abuse, and that we all recognize that the founders of this country set apart, put power in competition with itself to avoid those kinds of abuses. So I'd suggest I'd go back to something that you called me on. I think there are two ways to look at liberty. I mean, liberty is either freedom from them, freedom from government, or it is that government is us. And if you look at liberty as government is us, and you take into account that power corrupts and that there's potential for abuse and all this, you at least approach the problem slightly differently. And then you create mechanisms, you create response mechanisms and oversight that actually empower government to do what it is that you want to do at the same time that you check for abuses. No one's arguing for these massive sweeps. I mean, I know what the argument is out there, but I mean, we're not arguing for some massive sweep where, we data mine everything. As a matter of fact, data mining will actually allow you to focus more on the information that's relevant and restrict your need to go through all of those things. But, the question is, how do you look at liberty?
And I think the answer to some extent is that you look at it thoughtfully and reflectively, and you don't allow the fear that is generated by terrorism to trump every argument by saying, but we need it in the fight against terrorism, without actually thinking reflectively and dispassionately through its implications.